Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for making it to Globus Books shows. It is great to see you. Today is one of my favorite shows, and pretty much everyone who watches our shows at Globus here knows that every show is super special. I'm going to introduce our guest today. For many, she does not need much of an introduction, and those who are not familiar with Maria Stepanova's work, please read her books. Maria Stepanova, born in Moscow, speaking to us from Moscow today, is a poet, essayist, and journalist, and editor-in-chief of the online newspaper Colta. She is the author of over 10 poetry collections, and 3 of which have recently been translated and published in English: War of the Beasts and Animals, In Memory of Memory, and The Voice Over, which includes the selection of Stepanova's poetry and essays originally published in Russia between 1996 and 2016. Maria Stepanova has received multiple awards, nominations, all kind of prizes, and you can read more about her in the event page or in the discussion part of our YouTube video, which will be forthcoming after this show. I have to also mention the most masterful English translation by Sasha Dugdale, a British poet, playwright, and translator. Sasha is not joining us today, and I think that would be a separate show just to speak to her about this absolutely outstanding translation. There's just too much to discuss, so today we are going to focus on the book itself, and translation, I hope, will be a different show. Dugdale has translated Russian poetry and drama, including Chekhov's The Cherry Orchard, and from 2012 and 2017, she served as editor of modern poetry and translation. We hope to welcome Sasha some other time at the Globus Books show. My name is Zarina Zabriskie. I am an author from San Francisco, and I host and curate and produce the shows for this channel. Thank you everyone for joining. Just very briefly about Globus Books, who's providing the platform for our shows. Globus Books is an independent small bookstore with rich history. We've been around for over 50 years. In fact, the 50 years anniversary will be in the fall. So we've been serving San Francisco Bay Area and the United States since 1971, mostly focusing on the former Soviet Union and even Russian Empire literary realm. And lately we have added more aspects to cover, including this show. We do deal and have expertise in Thomas Dot, and we have vast collection of antique and vintage books, and please visit our website at www.globusbooks.com. And now I'm so eager to jump into the show, and first of all, welcome Maria.
Hello, and Zarina, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a huge honor.
Thank you, Masha. And also, thank you so much for making this conversation in English so everybody can understand and join us today, because a lot of our audience, very interested audience, does not speak or read in Russian, but nevertheless, very, very interested in our talks here, and in particular in your books. So it was extremely difficult for me to come up with the questions after reading these books, both in Russian and in English. I was alternating and jumping back and forth and equally enjoying, which never happened to me before, I have to say. Even reading Nabokov did not give me the same pleasure in 2 languages. This was an unbelievable journey. I was hopping back and forth, and as Bart says, the pleasure of intelligence was extreme. Despite the pleasure, I also had a lot of grief experienced during reading, because I think Maria wrote the history of a of our people, I want to say, which I don't know exactly what it is, but I come from a family of assimilated Russian Jews, and I believe a lot of our histories have one or more things in common, and I found so many coincidences and so many things striking serendipity that it threw me off my, so to say, intellectual chair into the total mess of weeping and crying and speaking to the photographs of the deceased great-grandmothers. So it took me a very long time to come up with any sort of, cohesive sentences and questions. But this is what came to my mind. One of the things that Maria mentions is that in the West, and I don't know to what extent it is happening in the East as well and in Russia, we have lost the ability to see the text as a whole, that we are very good at breaking things into parts, into focusing on details, and being unable to just grasp the whole book as is, which is very important reading experience. And for anybody who studied literature and a literary scholar, is extremely important. So that would be my first question. I think it's the most striking quality in the memory of memory. To me, after I went through this whole multi-dimensional, multi-layered richness of the text, which was so fluid, it was like thousands of rivers and rivulets all going back and forth, and it was brimming with facts and characters. There were the masterful repetitions and echoes, most poetic ones too. And the bird view, I think, was sort of like when you're going over the map of Russia. It's so big, you lose the scale, you lose any focus. But I guess what, for me, the kernel of the text, the core of it, was the journey itself, the journey into the kingdom of the dead, into the underworld, which of course is this archetypal journey, right, of most literary works, right? It's, you descend into the Russian inferno to bring back the loved ones, like Orpheus. And the pivotal point, or the for the reader, for me, was looking back, and not looking back. And then you turn into the pillow of salt, proverbially, like Lot's wife, because there's just, you can't bear the sight of looking back. And Masha, you yourself in the book and in some interviews said that the book is about looking back. So you also added the national flavor, so to say, to that. Well, very Tolstoy moment to it. From my favorite piece of writing, from War and Peace, the epilogue, I think, is the culmination of all literature. But the most important question: what moves us? What moves history? What moves our life as species? Certain people, or the movement of people? What is the role of a person in history, right? Is it Napoleon Kutuzov? Is it your great grandmother Sarah? Is it Sverdlov? Is it Stalin? And Tolstoy's answer that the movement of nations is caused neither by power, not by intellectual activity, not even the combination of two, but the activity of all the people who participated in the event. And that, of course, what Tolstoy is doing in War and Peace, and this is what you are doing as one of the best Russian writers writing, creating in Russian. You are telling the story of a family, of few families, and then you're bringing it to the universal level, so that it resonates with the readers from all over the world, even those who don't know anything about Russia or Russian history. So what is your take on your book as the whole? And are you capable, are you able as an author to distance yourself from the text to see it as a whole?
Wow. Thank you so much. It is well, it is a perfect question that needs to it needs a number of answers, and each one could well shape itself into an essay or a book, because there are so many possible approaches. When I well, of course, Tolstoy's idea of this immediacy, that is explaining things, that is standing beneath every historical movement, that is triggered not by a certain figure, but all the human beings present at a certain historical or, well, fictional scene. Of course, it resonates with me, and I suppose with everyone who has survived the 20th century, because, well, now we know that history as well as immediacy is might be explained as a number of figures. You've got this immense mass of zeros that and things, names, stories are lost in this number of zeros behind each historical tragedy. And I think that it claims from the author a different approach. If the author is someone contemporary kind of Orpheus, who is supposed to be descending all the way down to take someone he loves out of Inferno, the question she is to ask herself is there a slightest possibility of salvaging someone else besides your loved ones? And is it, well, isn't it immoral to be saving only the ones you already know that you want to save? And that was the question that was, well, pursuing me or haunting me while I've been writing. Each time I was delving into the archives, I was, by coincidence, or maybe that's the usual way with archival work, I was always stumbling on some stories, some names, some pictures that actually didn't have anything in common with the stories I wanted to tell, or, well, maybe some slight things, coincidences again, same names, same landscapes, people who were inhabiting the same towns of, well, yesteryear, century. And I felt that it would not be fair to tell my own story omitting these well, seemingly unnecessary stories and names. And the book was getting bigger, and my feeling of history was changing, developing, maybe getting distorted by this mass of lost voices that were struggling to get heard. But I never thought of the book as a linear journey. That is what is usually expected from the novel, right? It has to, well, it has to follow the Aristotelian model. It has to start somewhere, then to culminate, then, well, to find itself a decent ending. And I suppose that's precisely what I didn't want to do. I don't know if I succeeded, But what I wanted to write was a book that would be working more as a space than as a pathway. And that could be similar in a way to a poem or a book of poems, because that's how it works with poetry. You can enter a poem on any line that calls up to you. It could be somewhere in the fifth stanza, but it's insistent on you to notice it. And that's the same, hopefully, with my book. There is no straightforward or right way to be dealing with it. You can open it in the middle or closer to the end or at the beginning and then go leafing through it. And actually, the most beautiful way, the most beautiful thing I'm getting as a response is when someone is saying, well, I'm reading it and it is such a slow process because I have to Google up every second story or every second name, and then I'm diving in this story. I'm starting to read more about Charlotte Salomon or about Tsvetaeva, whatever. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to write an open book, open in that strange sense. Well, as you know, you're strolling through a corridor, and all the doors are wide open, and you can get out and then possibly get back for a couple of steps more. But I didn't want it to be the ending point. I wanted it to be a start of the journey.
Well, thank you for this answer. The answer is the journey itself, and it's certainly that's how the book does feel. It's a never-ending journey. I just finished reading and rereading it in Russian and English, and I want to go back and reread certain parts and reread it as a whole. So I certainly hope that people who haven't read it yet, after listening to us, after watching it, will give this chance of enriching and opening their lives, their reading lives, and their, life lives, not outside of literature, with this book. So my second question is about, also it's based on your quote. You said somewhere, and by this point it's like I'm in this fog of what you've written, and I'm not sure if you said it in a book or in an interview somewhere, that the book is about, no, I know where it is. It was when you are in Berlin and you're writing that I was glad that something else, another experience, resonated with the impossibility of memory. And that struck me. You write in the book about memory, and you're talking about the impossibility of memory, and that and the whole feel of the book brought back the association with a very questionable piece of art, which is David Here's The Impossibility, the physical impossibility of death in the mind of someone living, which, for those who are not familiar, it's an actual shark in the tank, in formaldehyde, in a glass tank. I saw it in the Metropolitan Museum, but I believe it's in several collections. There are several copies. I'm not necessarily a fan of this work, but it certainly struck me. And there is a certain impossibility of imagining the death, right? And that's, I think, also what struck me after I sent you all the questions, that the book is also about life and death and the impossibility of imagining death. The whole book is a attempt to experience death while living. And it's, of course, facing your own mortality is just way too much for pretty much anyone. So as an author, it's a heroic act to try and go into that. So what I thought after that the Russian version of the shark is actually Lenin's mummy, Lenin, and you write about it, and you call it the crystal coffin on the main square of the country that contains the mummy, just like the shark. And I think it's the physical impossibility to retain or let go. So the mummy becomes the symbol that lost its meaning. It's like the note with the name that no one knows in one of your grandmother's note in her purse. You find it, Nilidov, and nobody knows what that note means anymore. And that's the same with Lenin. Why is he there? What does it mean? Is he just like, here's shark, which at some point started to decompose, so they switched it to a newer, fresher, better shark? And is it the same shark? Is it the same piece of art? Is it the same Lenin? Is it the same memory? Or is the memory changing every single moment we talk about it or try to grasp it? And what is the Russian or Soviet memory, like collective memory? And I know for me, I have this image. For me, the Soviet memory is not a good thing. It's the oversized Lenin, and I once wrote about it because it keeps haunting me, that is chasing me through the Red Square and across the ocean into America, and it's chasing me like, you know, like the Peter the First, you know, like the bronze horseman in Pushkin. And I hear this all the time as I sleep, as I'm awake. It's like an Арсений Тарковский's poem. А прошлое все гонится за нами, как сумасшедший с бритвой в руке. And the past is still chasing us as a madman with a razor in his hand. So I think for me, it seems like as a nation, and I'm not quite sure what a nation here is, we are all haunted by this ghost. And it's not just Lenin, but this tyrant figure, the father, right? The archetypal Tsar. It could be Ivan the Terrible, Peter the Great, Stalin, this child-killing father, the Kronos-like child-devouring ghost of our collective memory. And that's what you wrote in the book. In Russia, where violence circulated ceaselessly, society passing from one space of tragedy to the next, as if it were a suite of rooms, a suite of traumas, from war to revolution, to famine and mass persecution, and on two new wars, new persecutions. The territory for this hybrid memory formed earlier than in other countries, spiraling, multiplying versions of what has happened to us over the last 100 years. And you write that we drag the memory like the load, like the suitcase. And wherever we go, wherever you go, and wherever we all go, it will not let you forget about it. Yet you say it's impossible to remember. And another horrifying image and the metaphor from your book is the memory as the layers of dead that come from underneath the snow, you know, in the spring of 1942. Or is it 1943?
Yeah, 42. Yeah.
42, around besieged Leningrad, where you find all the deaths by layers, and the only way you could tell when they died is by the way they are dressed. Like the heavier winter clothes indicate that they were killed, they died in winter. And that's the visual of the memory. And to me, you just killed it. This is it. But how did your understanding of Russian/Soviet collective memory develop during the writing process? And is it, getting back to where I started here, is it in fact possible to remember?
Wow. First of all, I love the notion as of Lenin in his mausoleum as an extra huge shark preserved for the future generations to admire, to be admired and purified. And what is interesting about your about the way you're putting it, that for you the figure, well, faceless something, Lenin or the Tsar, someone that is haunting you, someone that is following your footsteps all across the Atlantic, is a male figure, because it has its counterpart, of course, and which is Rodina Mать, the motherland mom, the extra huge feminine figure that was often, well, depicted in the Soviet monuments in the Soviet Union and in the countries of the Eastern Bloc. I still remember the horrifying figure of Mother Georgia in Tbilisi. I was there as a teenager, and there it was standing, clad in steel, with enormous breasts, holding a sword high up in the mountains. And well, there was nothing motherly about her, but sure, it was supposed to make you remember certain things. And it makes us asking, it brings us to asking ourselves what exactly we mean when we are speaking of collective memory. What exactly do we mean when we're speaking about, well, the memorizing process, the texture of memory is, the idea of remembering something together or one by one. Because, well, one may suppose that collective memory is something not belonging to us by definition. That is something that is imposed on us from the other side, and that's what the states and governments are keen on doing, forcing us to cling to some, well, established and stable narrative, using it as well, as a safe password, both into the world of the past and the future. But there is another kind of memory that is also quite collective, and anyone can, well, share and compare our experiences in this field. I have an essay that is partly based on a description of a dream I've read somewhere, and it is still, well, I'm still kind of obsessed with it. The dream is, well, as follows. The dreamer is a Muscovite, a woman in her 30s, and well, it is a nightmare. She's dreaming that the Russian state has issued a new law which says that anyone who will be caught somewhere undocumented without a passport is to be executed on the spot. Which is funny because it is also a stable thing. This dream about losing or mislaying or, well, destroying your Russian passport is something, I suppose, it's quite common, both in Russia and, well, well, among the former Russians, or I don't even know the decent term for it, people with Russian heritage, okay, or with Soviet heritage, post-Soviet heritage, whatever. And that's what immediately happens to the heroine. She instantly understands that she's lost her passport. And, well, it's a disaster, and her family is desperate, and immediately the execution squad arrives. They're ringing the bells, they're collecting the documents. She doesn't have any, and they're telling her that they're taking her away. And well, someone is crying. Her father refuses to talk to her, but her mother is a wise one in the family, and she's saying, well, it is all nonsense. Of course, they are not going to kill you. They will just exile you, and you should be happy with this. And that's what is happening. She's taken away. And the next scene is in the cattle wagon, in the train from the Soviet 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, the huge trains that were initially supposed to be carrying cattle, but at the next stop, they were modified to be transporting huge amounts of convicts. And so she is sitting at the floor of this strange place, and there are the windows are closed, они заколочены, and she's able to find some split in the woodwork, so she's able to see what is going on in the outside. And there is a huge white plain covered with snow, endless plain, all whiteness and remoteness. And what she's thinking is, well, of course, it feels so natural. I always suppose that. No, in fact, that is something I always knew, that all my previous life, all my experiences that I, well, proudly called my own ones, it was just a fleeting, dissolving thing that didn't have any connection to reality. It was all unreal. It was all a dream. But that white plain, this floor, this smell, these surroundings, this this unknown future, that is something I've been born for. And that's a dream that is still haunting me, and it belongs to a person who is younger than I am, and who is living in the 21st century, and still the vocabulary of these dreams, it's it's imagery. It is all a quotation, maybe from the Russian literature, maybe from the TV series of the 90s and 2000 of notes, maybe from Solzhenitsyn, Lydia Ginsburg, whatever. But it doesn't really matter, because these memories, these images, and this deep distrust for this feminine figure of the mother who is giving you good advice, but still she's treacherous, because her advice is something that brings you to this white nothingness. And it could be your mother or the motherland mom, but you are not supposed to rely on it. And the dream offers such a number of possibilities, but what is mesmerizing for me most of all is this borrowed way of looking at these lives of our own. We are unable to tell our own stories without using some building blocks from some other memories and old, lost, forgotten ones, the memories that were repressed or suppressed or left aside for decades, and they are not willing to go away.
Thank you for that. that just brings up so many thoughts and actually takes us to the next question of another impossibility to talk about yourself, which you mention in the book. But before I ask the question, I just want to add that it struck me, the nightmare also struck me because I heard from so many people, and I had it myself, the dream of being arrested as you come back to Russia and you stopped at the passport control at the customs and something is wrong with your documents and you're being arrested. And I think it haunts so many people who live abroad and possibly people who still live in Russia, that it is another collective dream. And so your analysis, your interpretation of it is very therapeutic, and I think it's great. And we all need to process it. This conversation, I think, is the one tiny stepping stone in the process of us healing ourselves in some way, or an attempt on healing in a way. There's something even for me very, very therapeutic in this, in reading and in talking, not in a, oh, now I feel great sense, on a, on the real therapy when you feel bad, feel horrible sense, but maybe you are on the way of looking into your trauma and recognizing it and eventually processing it, hopefully. But getting back to the question of the impossibility to speak about oneself, you are kind of doing it as we speak. You speak about other people's experiences just as you do this in your book. Instead of speaking about your own feelings, you delve into your great-grandmother's feelings, your grandfather's feelings, your mother's feelings, your father's, and you know that too. You actually discuss it. You mentioned the incident when you were interviewed for a book of personal interviews of writers, and then not included into this book because yours were just about other people, not about you. And so there is this certain impossibility of speaking about oneself, which I notice a lot as I do the shows. I notice it in writers who either Russophone or writing in English or other languages, but with a Soviet background. People, authors, are much rather to speak about others' experiences, and so do non-authors as well. And I was wondering, you do discuss it, you go into that in your book, and you quote Lydia Ginsburg, the rejection of the private and selfish in the name of harsh citizenship. You talk about the indifference of each individual fate for saving the whole. And you also say that among the Soviet code of values were the denial of the personal, contempt for the individualism of any sort, and for the bourgeois hedonistic conveniences. And showing off or standing apart in any way was shameful, and any expression of the individual interest invoked guilt. You talking about your own interests, that it was considered selfish and inconsiderate. And here's a quote: the aesthetic system of late Soviet life was based on unwritten regulations built around modesty. Any manifestation of excess or individuality, even earrings in the ears of schoolgirls, and anyone who grew up there recognizes that, was perceived as an attempt to break out into the territory of unacceptable exclusiveness. It threatened general equality. And it even linguistically so, because the word ambition had different connotations in English and in Russian. In American English, it's positive, and in Russian, it's extremely negative. And I don't know if it changed, maybe it did. I didn't live in Russia for the last 20 years. But for you, what do you think this inability to write or talk about yourself, or does it have something to do with actually being yourself? And are we hiding behind others? Something that I thought of a little later. Do you think it's more common to female writers than male writers, even when we take the Soviet-born writers? And did you overcome it by writing the book? And the last one, mini question within this big question, if you did overcome it, in fact, and you were to speak about yourself, what would you say about yourself now here?
It is interesting because, well, I've been trying to answer this question throughout the book. Again, I have a set of answers. And the first, the most obvious one is, I suppose, and the easiest one, because I'll again and again, I'll use someone else's words, someone else's concept for describing the sensibility that is naturally leading me and well, a number of writers that I feel that are doing more or less the same thing, that is leading us to be evading this central, or well, not so central question of, well, one own self. And I'm speaking of this post-memorial, the post-memorial sensibility, the term that was coined by Marian Hirsch in her, well, groundbreaking book, The Generation of Post-Memory. And I think that this concept, the idea of post-memorial sensibility, is explaining a lot in what is happening nowadays, what shapes our relationship with the past, with the present, and maybe with ourselves. Because what she is describing, and her own field is Jewish studies and post-Holocaust studies. So what she's describing is a certain mode of behavior, a certain way of remembering that is common for the Holocaust survivors of second and third generation. But what she is describing is strikingly familiar to many people I've encountered, some of them Jewish, some of them not. And what I mean is that the overall weight, overall importance, the place the past is taking in our lives is maybe much more than the place for the present. And our humble selves are having such a tiny spot in this huge puzzle that we are not really willing to pay attention, because what had happened 50 or 70 years ago is so important, so vivid, so necessary, both in moral sense and well, also in terms of, well, being interesting, because things were happening, well, down there, and we are existing in the aftermath. And the other thing, we are, well, actually, and that is something I've been thinking of for a number of years, and I still think it is true. Thinking of our lives in very practical terms, we'll see that we are occupying someone else's space, because we don't really know what and who would replace us without all the catastrophes of the 20th century. We are an immediate outcome, a direct outcome of what had happened. So we are, well, both the survivors in a certain sense and beneficiaries of what had happened. We are inhabiting the world that doesn't really belong to us. It was supposed to belong to well, to someone else. We are occupying someone else's space, sitting on someone else's chairs, while regarding someone else's portrait. And that's a troubling idea. And coming back to Marian Hirsch's concept, what she's describing is a way of thinking of your life. Well, no, let's put it in a different way. It's a mind that remembers the streets and street vendors and bookshelves and morning habits of 1936 much better than the same street in 2005. It means that we are cherishing the remnants of the past, the bits and pieces we were able to collect and preserve, much more than anything that might happen to us nowadays. And this incongruity, it doesn't really give us space to be thinking about whatever relics we could leave after ourselves. And it is a strange phenomenon, but I suppose that it explains a lot in contemporary tastes, in contemporary cultural space, and I suppose in current politics.
Thank you. That answers several of my questions right away and still opens many more. And I'm very much looking forward to also opening it to everybody's questions. We have a few more to cover before we do so. And of course, there's such richness there that the conversation could be endless, and it feels very limited to exist in time and not to be able to explore many of the things that are very tempting to be explored. So I try to base the questions or structure my questions so people who didn't have a chance to read the book yet get a sense of the book. And so you include essays, to put it down like very primitively, or you write about many artists and many artwork as you interweave these subplot stories in the conversation about the history of the nation and the history about your family. And you build the memory layer by layer, and you turn back, or you turn to other authors who wrote about memory before. And in one place you list your predecessors in this particular sequence: Proust, Nabokov, Sebald, and you also in other places refer to Pamuk and other authors, modern authors. Can you speak of your connection with these authors and how their work influenced or did not influence your writing?
I think that, first of all, maybe about this principle or this technique of, or this idea of including the stories or the essays, the bits and pieces and patches that are seemingly unrelated to the story I'm dealing with, a familial story of 3 or 4 Russian Jewish generations that somehow managed to survive by staying unnoticed, staying at the margins. When I was thinking of writing this book, I felt that, well, in comparison with a lot of my, well, with hundreds of my predecessors, because, well, who didn't write a book about her or his family? It is the most natural thing to do, and I love the genre. What was so special in my case? Maybe it was, well, the misunderstanding of obvious limits my working material was providing me with. Firstly, I wanted to tell the stories I didn't really know. I couldn't really connect the stories I remembered from my childhood to the faces on the old photographs. Of course, I knew the main actors, but distant cousins, aunts and uncles, and whoever else, friends from gymnasium, from St. Petersburg, from Odessa. I had this feeling of, well, unbelievable density, and still of well, total inability to dig deeper, because as it seems, as it comes, I know Proust, Roosevelt, or Lydia Ginsburg with their inner workings and habits and passions much better than I do my own grandmother. Well, because Proust was eager to be speaking, and they preferred to keep silent. And so a natural, or maybe not so natural, way of speaking of my direct, well, antecessors was creating a space where my Parisian grandmother and Proust were actually walking the same streets, rubbing shoulders, and some powdery feeling of closeness, the same newspapers, the same musical hits, the same air of the times they were breathing. It was a way of explaining some details, or maybe some background of both the existences. And so I was trying to create these spaces where I could place them together, and simultaneously to pay homage to the writers and writing I love so much, like, hiding a leaf in the forest in some way. And there is another thing, talking of, general lessons, or, I'll mention just one thing, but it is of utmost importance to my work and to my thinking. I remember how I was reading the Bald for the first time. It was in, some 10 or 15 years ago. He was translated to Russian for the first time. It was after Litz, and he was the book came out and was unnoticed at the time. And I stumbled upon it a couple of years later, and I was mesmerized by a very peculiar thing among all the others, besides the writing, besides the ideas, the imagery. What really ails me in the idea of well, writing fiction is the concept of interesting and uninteresting things. Some things are, some people, some stories are presumed to be interesting, to be, well, good reading material, to be suspenseful, to be exciting, to be chosen among the others, to be put on the top level of a certain hierarchy. And the other one, the uninterestings, are supposed to be staying somewhere in the darkness, staying aside. And well, there is this famous line from Susan Sontag where she is saying that, well, quality literature is supposed to be boring. What else could it be? And I don't actually think so. And so I was endlessly thinking of a writing mood, a way of writing that would keep things interesting, but not interesting, that would keep involved numbers of things and stories without having to choose the privileged ones. And that's what Zebold is dealing with in his, well, elusive enumerations of things lost and gone and vanished, and names and photographs. And you never know if a person or a photograph were invented, and if the relationship he's describing is an actual one, a real one, or an invented one. And then you understand that it doesn't make a difference. Well, yes, I think that maybe that was well, it was quite important for me.
Thank you, and that made me think what you just said, and the way you said it made me restructure the remaining questions, and I'm going to try to put them together in one so we can then open it to the people in the audience. And you know, you are talking about Sebald and using photography, which you of course, you know, don't do on purpose. You describe the photographs instead. And what you just said about interesting versus uninteresting is also mentioned in Barthes, whom I love, Camera Lucida. What, you know, this reverse relationship of how it's not what photographer chooses, but then what photographer does chooses not to explain becomes more interesting, and the whole idea of punctum. And
punctum, of course, yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm not going to, it's tempting to go into a little commentary of those who didn't have time yet to read Barthes' Camera Lucida. It's not his most well-known work. I'll leave it in the question so you can maybe go into that, because you do mention that in your book as well. But photography takes such a big part in your book, and yet your attitude towards photography is so complex. And of course, you're the daughter of a photographer, and that's the title of your last chapter. And it's so complex, and so is mine relationship with photography. So that's the whole other separate conversation on that. But including into this question on photography, I'll try to sandwich my general question. One metaphor and one visual I got from your book is this always present border or boundary, cross line that you mentioned, writing about your family or writing about Salomon's work, or Barth or Sebald, this invisible film-like that separates the past from the present, the reader from the author, the memory from history, and it's always there. There's this boundary that we constantly bounce upon, or cross sometimes, or sometimes feel in this liminal space. And I wrote down tons of quotes, and I'm not good, for the sake of time, I'll leave it to the audience to find them themselves. But there's almost in every chapter, there's a mention or several mentions of this border. And so this is the question for you: the photography, your attitude to photography, and what is this border? What is this boundary that I sensed?
I love this question because it touches something that is, well, very dear to me in this book, and it often gets unnoticed. This idea of a moving, shimmering veil or screen or border that is dividing two different realms, the realm of the living and the dead, or well, other ones. And I'm quoting there a place I love in Paul Celan's Conversation in the Mountains, where he is writing about this moving curtain that is meant to create, well, to distort the view for the viewer. You are unable to see clearly because the air itself is moving, is providing this shield of not invisibility, but well, things are visible / invisible. They are visible, but in another sense. The view is remade, distorted, maybe not understood, unperceived. And that state of constant search in full presence of something that has been just found, but you are unable to get your hands on it, to perceive it. It is very dear for me. I have, well, serious issues with any kind of borders, actually, besides this one, because, well, maybe because of my Soviet heritage. I was born and lived for 17 years in the country where the borders were closed. We were not supposed to be traveling. That's why my English is so faulty. It was supposed to be the English of a reader, not of a speaker. And there was something, well, very calming about growing up in the Soviet Union. This embryonic feeling of being very tightly, cozily, well, stranglingly embraced. And well, that's why I hate borders. I feel relieved and elated every time I'm, well, flying somewhere and crossing this passport control thing. And so the last year and a half were, well, uneasy for me. And that's why I guess I have issues with photography as well. First of all, it is, well, it is too obvious. It is all present, it is all here. It promises to give you everything. You are forgetting to read the caption, so you don't really know what exactly the photograph depicts. A killing, okay, but was it in China, in the Soviet Union, in Mexico City? It is just this street and a dead person lying face down. You don't really know, but still you have this feeling being there, seeing that. And that is well, it was described long ago, but there is this troubling quality about the photograph that is supposed to tell you much more than the text does. And still it, well, it lies or it stays silent. It is more of a memento than of an explanation. But we are so fixated nowadays on all the kinds of visual images. Visual imagery is practically replacing the others, the temporal ways of interacting with the world around. And that is interesting, that's fascinating, it is seductive, because, well, of course, it is the same with memory. No one is immune to the seductive powers of memory or photography, which are pretty much the same. Some, well, the shark frozen in formaldehyde. But we are keeping the shark in our houses for sentimental reasons, for other reasons. And there is something eerie about the relationship of a person and her photographs, both of the black and white photos from circa 1908, or with the thousands of selfies or, well, street photographs made in the last 2 years. We are standing at the border, unable to enter, but, well, satisfied with looking. It is an interesting mode of interacting with being, and troublesome, I suppose.
Thank you for that. And I just wish we had more time to go to just in photography, because of course that for me is also a very close topic from every single point, but we will not do that, not at least for now. I think there could be a separate conversation or an essay or anything. I think it's very important, and especially now in the moment that we're living, the role of the visual versus text and this whole mini death. I think it's, you know, goes back to our inability of facing the thought of our own mortality is deeply ingrained into this conversation. And I had 1 million other questions, but we are going to open this for our audience. Thank you for being with us and listening and thinking with us. And I see a lot of familiar faces, and I know a lot of people are listening.
I wanted to see whether or not you have found a connection between the Soviet collective memory of tendency towards denial, for example, denial of the Holocaust and denial of the Golodomor and other kinds of denials, and the connection with false memory, because when I look at some of the recent productions or, you know, seriale about the Soviet era, it just seems like a lot of it is based on false memory. False memory in the sense of interpretation of the way things were, you know, a glorification. So there's two angles to it. On the one hand, denying horror. On the other hand, glorifying, you know, kind of a limited type of world. So I was just wondering, I don't know if it makes sense, but the connection between false memory and denial.
Thank you so much. That's wildly interesting. Actually, I think that people who are responsible for creating these, new Russian TV series, they don't have false memories. It is more of cynically bringing to life someone else's ideas and views on history. But the Russian state itself is definitely trying to create a new narrative, a new set of memories that could effectively replace the real history that is based on facts and witnesses and evidence, and that is actually happening for the last 15 years or more, and the results are, well, I would say they are impressive, but there is one more trait that seems to me, rather important, because in the Soviet era, we used to have these two coexisting narratives. The one general grand narrative that the Soviet party, the Communist Party, was forming and moving forward, and keeping safe for generations. And a person was supposed to be, to know her party history or whatever else by heart, to keep it in mind at all times. But at the same time, there were private stories and private history that was mostly kept in the families and were transmitted through generations in this low-key but very important way. And these two stories were never mingling. They were somehow coexisting. And on one hand, I suppose it keeps a person, sane, because you are knowing there is an official history and your own intimate story that can differ a lot from the official history. And on another hand, there is something, deeply ambiguous about the necessity of keeping in mind, keeping in parallel two stories, two narratives that are constantly contradicting each other. And there is something, I'm not a psychologist, so I'm using the word schizoid very carefully, but there is something, deeply incongruent about this ability to be using both the narratives almost simultaneously for 7 or 6 decades. It does something with a person, and it does something with the community, with the society that is consisting of these persons. And I think that in a way it had shaped the new post-Soviet sensibility that is created and existing like patchwork. People are, able to converse using different notions, different patches that are not supposed to have any congruency. So when you are, that's a common source of information, and I apologize for that, but still, when you're riding a taxi in Moscow, you may well be sure that a taxist would say something about, the good old times, and it was better in Stalin's years, and we need a strong leader and something of the kind. When you're contradicting him and saying something about how corrupt the government is, or how awful is that we are in war with Ukraine, he immediately agrees, not because I've managed to persuade him, and not because he doesn't care, but simply because these two pages of mind, these two places are not interconnected. and that's how it works. And well, it is a problem.
Thank you, Maria. I've got a question that got to me through Facebook Messenger from Louise. And the question is, you write a lot about anti-Semitism throughout the history of pre-revolutionary Russia and the USSR. How was this accepted in Russia? And did this attitude change?
Well, actually, Louis, thank you so much for the question. It did change. It changed a lot, I suppose, but not only in Russia. Because what I was trying to show, and there is a chapter in the book dealing with it, the overall attitude towards Jews, including the assimilated and educated Jews, it was pretty much the same all over Europe, at least. And I could give you a couple of florid quotations from Thomas Mann, for instance, who married a Jew girl, and he was writing about her and her family, saying, "Oh, they are so cultivated that no hint, no idea of their Jewishness comes to mind." And there is no difference with what was happening in Russia. It was the general attitude, it was in the air. Well, now I suppose that, the situation in Russia is very different. I wouldn't speak of anti-Semitism because it is something that can be shared, that can be shaped, formed, and inspired at any moment by the state media. There is an obvious xenophobic quality about the Russian society and the way it is regarding itself. And it did get worse in certain ways after the Soviet times, not in terms of anti-Semitism, but a good part of the Soviet Union's Jewish population emigrated in the late 90s. So there is such a limited amount of Jews living in Russia in current times. But what is really troubling me is the constant, readiness to be hostile towards any kind of a stranger. It doesn't do good to a person or a country.
I might be misunderstanding. Reading Svetlana Alexievich, who has interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people telling their truth, I get the perception that the government does not believe her, that she has been attacked for telling lies. Is that how I understood it? And is this a part of this memory that should not be there, the truths?
Yeah, exactly. The problem with how would I call it, this state-inspired narrative, this solid monolithic fiction of the past our state, our government is presenting to the Russian citizen or abroad, it is regarding the latest Russian history, starting with the Russian Empire and seamlessly moving or seemingly seamlessly moving to Putin's times as a never-ending parade of victories and victories again and achievements and whatever else, and everything that doesn't exactly fit the picture, like the Russian Revolution and years of civil war, or the Stalin's repressions and millions of people jailed and killed, or the I could go further. They are simply denying these facts or retelling them in a more, well, lively mode. So they are looking not as gaps and holes in the fabric of history, but like, well, some slight shadows at the corners. And of course, any human confession, every, well, tiny, truthful story, maybe an anecdote, a joke, a family memory that might have nothing potentially endangering, well, the state's fate, it still seems a threat because it has different fabric. It's more real than the fiction they present.
It becomes really difficult to see that humans count if
Exactly.
this is to be the narrative. They do not count.
Exactly. And I suppose that it has worsened during the last few years. I'm horrified with things that are going on all around us.
Because for me, your book is about humans, and it's about me, and it's about a lot of other people. It's about humans being human. And it was, I'm a photographer myself, and my own photographs from all over Europe and parts of the world kept coming up all the time. And I started collecting an album. There it is, and there it is, and these persons, and the woman in Moscow that I did, you have seen. The interesting thing in this conversation is, you know what I was doing when I was photographing? I was trying to get into Lenin's mausoleum.
Aha! That's it. Yeah, a living being instead of a dead shark. Yeah, precisely.
Yeah, they wouldn't let me in. They sent me that way and the other. And then I photographed that woman who was going against the men in military uniform. So thank you for an
amazing story. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gudrun. And we're so lucky to have people from all over the world, from Copenhagen and then from Nairobi. And Tony has a question from Nairobi, actually. So go ahead, Tony.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Tony.
Yes. Hi, Maria Stepanova.
Hi.
Yeah, very nice.
Hi, hi, Tony.
Yes. Yes, hi. Sorry about that caption. It's ironic that I'm here with, world-renowned photographers, and I have the absolute wrong caption on my Zoom. But we often make this mistake even sometimes in the newspaper, and the subjects get very annoyed when they're called by the wrong name, like in the mainstream newspapers.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't.
Yes. So, and I have absolutely no idea how that has happened, but anyway. It's very strange, and I'm speaking, as somebody just here from, like African Kenya, and who has been to Russia, 4 or 5 times in the past. The latest being during the 2018 World Cup. I was in St. Petersburg for, for the better part of a month. And the image, when people say the Russians, you being Russians, I don't know if you realize it, but I think because of the Cold War sort of movies, we were always brought up, there was always a guy called, Ivan or Boris, and just Western propaganda, because, we are colonized by the British. So all this Western sort of literature, there is almost a fear. Even today, when I was, leaving the newspaper, and I said, I have a meeting, with Zarina and her friend Stepanova, and people are like, the Russians. There's almost like, there's a fear. And yet it seems to me that even the current regime actively, maybe I'm wrong, but it's as if whether it's Putin, whether it's, like from Stalin, it seems that there is a need almost for a narrative that Russia should be feared just as a nation and, as a people, that, that the Russians, there's so much loaded on it, like, people from another planet. There's everyone else, everyone gets it. And then up there in the north, across 11 time zones, there's Russia and the Russians. So is this narrative actively sort of promoted by like even your current leadership? And do the people enjoy, like, not all the people, of course, but a substantial amount of the Russian people seem also to like about the idea of just, being feared and being strong, or being led by, iron men or strong men. And yeah, it's sort of very strange that it's almost stereotypical from, Cold War novels. But this is how it appears that Putin gets his strength half the time from projecting this image of the Russian bear that mauls everybody else.
Yeah, riding tigers, yeah, sporting his naked body, yeah. It is, well, it is strange, and well, actually, it is, well, it is so silly. Yeah, you're right. This narrative is endorsed by the Russian state, by the Putin's government, maybe because, well, they have to think pretty hard to invent something else, because, well, it will take time to find a sufficient self-description, and they already have a beautiful one coined by the Cold War, then they can use, and so they use it. And in a way, I would say that both the sides of the media are keen on creating the same thing, the same impression, and well, they are willingly playing this this game of creating of this image of Russia and Russians as well, monstrous, and of Russia as a different place with different ethical framework, with different ways of being, with exotic experience, something unlike anything else, which is bullshit, of course. And well, there is no, but well, we know how experience can be exoticized and what comes after. So yes, that is a sad story. And that is why I'm also stopping each time someone is writing in the newspaper, Russians are doing this or that. Russians are thinking. Russians are invading Crimea. It was not Russians, it was Putin and his army. And it doesn't give anything to the to the real understanding of Russia and what is going on there. It is huge, it is very diverse, and well, it is quite modern, I have to say, with lots of interesting thinking and good art, which are existing independently. And Putin may be riding tigers wherever he wants to.
As we were discussing your book, we said something along the lines of that personal memory kind of ends up being, you know, shared in a way because the words are borrowed and narratives are borrowed. And I was making a parallel in my mind with the much discussed book by Svetlana Boym, The Future of Nostalgia, where she says that while longing is universal, nostalgia can be divisive. I think you might remember when the production, and this is also even in reference to another question that was asked here about the state production of so-called collective pseudo memories started around 1995 or so. I remember that watching these people for example, in Staraya Kvartira, in the old apartment show, felt ambiguous right away, at least for me. On the one hand, it could be clearly seen that people need this unification around, retrieving the memories that were invalidated for the moment by the dissipation of the country, and that this was considered as a therapeutic experience. But right away, something felt uncanny for me, especially when people would enjoy, singing the pioneer songs, the old people wearing pioneer red ties and so on. So I'm interested in how you perceive whether this nostalgic discourse was hijacked after the fact by the state, or whether it could be, conceived for hijacking. It was right away the seed of this future restoration of falsely remembered USSR, whether it was already planted in the project, and if so, what was it that allowed some people to resist this imposed narrative, and some people to completely buy into it to the point of warring with Ukraine and all of that happened that we're watching? Like, is there any way to protect your private memories and not being caught like a fish on a hook by by the profit-seeking state and so on?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a wonderful question. I would I would propose first of all to divide nostalgia and this post-memorial thing I'm trying to write about, because I suppose they are very different. And I think that post-memorial sensibility is much more international and transgenerational in a way, because it embraces and unifies personal memories despite the concrete story or concrete language or country where memory is rooted. They are up for sharing, and they are enlarging your personal experiences. But being so grainy, being so personal, they are having only this humanness as a common denominator, while nostalgia is using decorum that is easy to imitate, because it belongs to a certain country, a certain society, a certain social strata. And so what may be hijacked, what may be stolen, is a certain style. And that's what had been done in the 90s with Staraya Kvartira, with old songs of important things, Старые песни о главном, that were not revoking memories. They were creating fictions that were resembling the past, but modified so to make this feeling of easy nostalgia more grounded, more logical. Because when you're seeing singers dressed in folk costumes of Stalin's times, singing of the tractors and beautiful fields, you are suspecting that it is all fake. It is some brand of a Truman Show, something that is specially invented for fitting some purpose. But on the other hand, you are prepared to play with this thing for a while, it is, well, it is seductive. You are supposed to be sharing a certain experience with a number of other viewers, even despite the fact that this experience never was common. It never was an experience that could, well, unify people around it. But still, yes, it was an easy game, and I think that it was a first step, a first stone in this huge mansion of post-Soviet Putin narrative of, well, happy and stable Russia with its utopia of power and glory.
Thank you, Maria. It's great. Yelena, thank you so much for asking this question. It was one of my questions that I had to skip to open it up. And because the immortal regimen that spread, you know, from Russia and worldwide is quite a phenomenon. And I do some journalism, and 2 or 3 years ago, I did an investigation of the immortal regiment movement and the way it's being sponsored and weaponized by the government worldwide, and that led to some discoveries, let's put it this way, and the way the memory is being weaponized and the way the movement, the root movement was hijacked, that there was quite a process behind it. So that was a great question and a great answer.
I also write on the subject of memory, because in my family, there are many victims of both Stalinism and Nazism. And actually, I almost completed a book tentatively called The Dictionary of the 20th Century. So like stories of my family members will be arranged in alphabetical order, like a dictionary, you know. It's not only about that, it's also about my immigration from the Soviet Union in 1972, a long time ago, and several immigrations, because I went to different, with my parents, I was a child, right? So this whole subject is very important to me. It's a very, because it's both a very personal subject for each of us, who is, you know, who had family members murdered, and also it's a collective subject. It's both collective, it's collective memory that becomes personal memory. So basically, when I write about it, I write very personally. So it's a story of my family, but but it also happens to be the stories of many other families and millions of other families, right? So, and I think for our American compatriots or counterparts, whatever, I think it's almost impossible to really comprehend this. I don't want to insult anyone, but I think it's almost impossible to comprehend the scale of what happened in the former Soviet, on former Soviet territory. I mean, the number of victims in each family, everywhere, it's impossible. I was trying to explain this to my American-born daughter and to my American ex-husband. No matter how much I explain, it doesn't reach them because it's not part of their experience, you know? So it's just, unless it's part of your personal experience, like, well, I mean, I didn't live at the time, so experience of your family's past. I think evil on this scale is impossible to comprehend and to accept even. That's why many people deny it, because it's almost like the universe, you know, you can't imagine the infinity. I mean, human mind can't imagine the infinity of the universe. It's something that resists comprehension. So it's this, I think it's the same thing with the with what happened in the 30s and 40s on former Soviet territory. It's something that is impossible to comprehend with a normal mind. And I think that's why many people deny it. Even people in Russia, or what used to be Soviet republics, because it's not something that you can comprehend. If someone just tells you, if it didn't, there were some families where there were no victims of Stalinism, right? So if it didn't happen in their families, it's not something you can even understand.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it can be. I don't think really it could be understood or perceived in logical terms, even in the minds of those who had survived it.
Yes,
It is unimaginable. But on the other hand, right, of course, one is unable to understand, to grasp the concept of infinity, but this point is infinitely trying to understand this. It is not a result, it is a process. And so I suppose that's what writing is for sometimes. If one is unable to get a full understanding of what had happened using, well, historical books and facts and documents and all the evidence, it might be that someone would just stumble upon a certain book, maybe this book of yours you're completing right now, maybe some other one, and it will bring, this momentous feeling of epiphany that will not do everything, but might change something. And it's already a good result, I suppose.
Yeah, but when I write about what I know from my parents' memories, from my parents' stories, right? I write about concrete people, concrete individuals, right? In my family. And I mean, it's up to the reader to understand. Maybe in the introduction I will write, it must be general knowledge that it happened to millions of people. But I think it's impossible to comprehend, to imagine mass executions of Soviet Jews, for example, or Polish Jews. So, mass executions of what is called Holocaust by bullets. Most people think of Holocaust as gas cameras, and most people in the West, at least, are not very aware of what, I don't like the title or the name Holocaust by bullets, but just short. What happened on Soviet territory, the way about a million, maybe more people were just taken from their towns, cities, villages. Babi Yar is just one of many. Yeah, many people know Babi Yar, but they don't know that it happened in every village, every town, every city of every republic occupied by the Nazis. Latvia, Lithuania, Estonian less, Ukraine,
of course, yeah.
Moldavia, Belarus, right? In every village, every tiny village, every city, every town, as soon as Nazis entered, Jews were taken away and shot. I mean, first they were put in a ghetto, then they were shot. So this is something impossible to comprehend, that people actually went to their execution, and often they had to dig their own graves first. I mean, this is something that resists, it's just one doesn't want to imagine this. It's not something that one wants to carry around. And also, when you think that those who didn't who didn't fall into, who weren't killed by the Nazis, then they were killed by Stalinists. So, I mean, what a time. In my family, they were either killed by the Nazis or by Stalinists. And sometimes I think, how come I was born? I mean, it was such a stroke of luck that my parents survived both, They lived in that time and they, survived. We can complain about all sorts of things. I complain about life in America all the time, but, just have to compare it to that time, and then, none of our complaints will actually mean anything.
Yeah. But Nina, I think you sort of underestimate the capacity of other people. I mean, I'm here in Africa, but and in Kenya, but thanks to books like Martin Amis's Cover the Dread, thanks to documentaries, thanks to artists, even when you mentioned Babayar, I know exactly, that Holocaust by bullets, when we've seen the documentaries where they had the Jews shoot them and you can see them falling into pits. And if you are a good student of history, like some of us, whether the horror is in, that specific horror that you've mentioned about Stalinist times, if one is interested, or, Rwanda genocide next door in 1994, where 1 million Tutsis were killed, 1 million people in 100 days, that's 10,000 people a day. And I think that's why we artists exist. That's why you're writing your dictionary. You're writing it so that you can make that horror, you can encapsulate it into a comprehensible, you can reduce infinity into words so that people can understand these experiences. And personally, that's why I've always been very interested, whether it's in Russia or, I've been to Dachau in 2014. I went to the Dachau camp when I was in Munich, but I made it a point because it's not too far. And because I wondered, even my paternal grandfather died fighting for the British in Burma, in current day Myanmar, where they're doing all those things. But he died at 24 on Thursday, December 28, 1944. And one wonders, how does an African guy in 1944 end up halfway across the world in some jungle, eating cockroach soup and suffering from dysentery and malaria, fighting Japanese? So it's ridiculous. And someone can say it's incomprehensible, but this is our entire role as artists. And so it's even up to you, your responsibility, because you're very passionate about this, to make sure that that's the best damn book, that you actually can encapsulate those tragedies so that, people can read it, even another generation, and comprehend the things that you're calling incomprehensible. And for me, it was Martin Amis's Koba the Dread. It was the most heartbreaking book I've ever read, but that got me very interested a long time ago into this sort of a world history where these tragedies and human-made catastrophes meet. Because these people, they're like COVID-19, except that it's human beings.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you.
Thank you
That's great.
so much.
I want to bring Maria in because that's what she's writing about in her book, and it's translated now. That's exactly what the book does. So, Maria, what do you say?
Well, here I can only sign with both my hands under what Tony just said, because, well, I suppose that, well, the main thing a person, a writer can do right now is maybe staying aware, because sometimes we are, well, underestimate our, well, awareness of things that are going on. And that is maybe the main thing, staying aware, staying conscious, staying connected. And well, last but not least, staying gentle in our perception of the past and in the way we are, well, connecting, touching, interacting with every single story of every human being.
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, just one moment, Nina. I want to say that this is exactly what you're doing in your book, and you bring it to the level higher. And I completely agree with Tony that this is the whole idea of literature for me, and I think for a lot of people, is to be able to bring in and spark this empathy, this ability to if not comprehend, it's incomprehensible, but to feel, like, Celan's poetry, right? of what is happening somewhere where you've never been. And I love that our conversation has been expanded from being so Eurocentric or Russia-centric, Russocentric in our sense, to the global scale, because these kind of tragedies are not particular to the European continent. This has been happening everywhere. And while we're focusing on the Holocaust, and I'm the one to speak, my both sets of great-grandparents were actually the victims of the bullet Holocaust in Ukraine and the starvation of the siege in Leningrad. So I'm not in any way disrespecting that experience, but I want to recognize that we are not in any way exclusive with our suffering, because in a way it's easy to get some kind of chip on our shoulder. I'm the survivor of such an exclusive horror that nobody can understand it. This is not true. There are a lot of people who experience that and who are not even being recognized for having experienced them. You take Vietnam, you take Nicaragua, Africa. Unfortunately, it's universal. And this is what Maria again does, because she brings in the book, she brings it to the next level, from one person going through the loss and grief to us as humans, as one's experiencing the loss at infinitum. So back to Nina, I know you wanted to say something.
Yeah, thank you, Zarina. I just wanted to remark on something that Chelsea Zula mentioned. He mentioned the book by Martin Amis, Koba the Dread, Laughter and the 20 Million. Actually, I think it was more like 70 million Stalin's victims, closer to 70 million than 20 million. But anyway, I read that book several times, and I think it's a really important book, even though there were much more powerful books and much more detailed books about Stalin's repressions and Stalin murders during Stalinism. But that book in particular, I always recommend that book to my Western American, British acquaintances.
Because I've been thinking on this notion of a tragedy that is so huge and so unbearable that a mind gazing in from the outside just cannot comprehend it, because there is no similar experience behind that mind, and so it can just try, but this kind of experience always stays locked. And yes, I agree with Nina that it is an idea that often, one can often feel like that, especially when the loss is so huge. But there is another thing, and I think it is important. When one is looking oneself together with one's trauma, with one's huge, unbearable, unimitable loss, all alone with your loss, any kind of a more general conversation is getting questioned, because if you are unable to connect, if your experience is unready for any kind of comprehension, then it seems that a country, a writer, a language is keeping a dialogue with itself from that point. And it is, a conversation that is locked in one's head or in one's body. And in a way, I think that it does certain things both to the consciousness, to the consciousness of the country, and it adds some special thing to the quality of writing. As we all know, contemporary Russian literature is not so often getting translated into English or into well, American English, and I suppose that it is a result of two inabilities meeting each other, two inabilities to keep a dialogue. One side is regarding literature coming from Russia or from another troubled societies as some kind of exotic external information, pretty much what you've been described. Some, well, border-like experience that can be described, and we are willing to hear about it, but it cannot be fully comprehended because it is so exotic. It is not literature anymore, it is just a straightforward report. And well, for a Russian writer, it's a natural thing to think that, well, we are so deeply rooted in our culture, and it's a great culture, that the outer world is unable to comprehend us, so, well, off with it. I don't really think it is productive. Maybe some things are impossible to convey, but we should, well, at least try.
Thank you. And I think you're doing it as a, very few writers can, and great write. That's what makes a writer great. And I say it with all, understanding of what I'm saying. I think you've done it. I think the way you speak about it in your book and the way you just spoke about it now, you are able to put this personal suffering and personal inability to express this unexpressible, unspeakable, into the words that resonate with all, into the universal human experience. And that's the gift. And that's why this book delivers, and that's why this book has been translated into so many languages. And that's what it does for literature, for the world literature, and for Russophone literature as well. And we have a comment from our contributor who's with us on most shows on YouTube, Matthew Salomon, whose family also suffered in the Holocaust. So, he's partially, I think, is invested on an emotional level. He's saying it is unbearable for some to see clearly how unspeakable things have become cultural commodities and pure kitsch. And he says, I'm thankful to everyone, and thank you, Maria Stepanova. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you for that.
I'm extremely grateful to all of you for being here, for following, for creating this conversation we've just had, and it was wonderful. Thank you so much. I don't know if reading helps comprehending things, but what I know for sure is that reading helps. Don't know what it does to be so, well, troubling, soothing, moving the person forward, but that's what it does. So yeah, well, I just think that even in the most painful points, if you have to grasp for something, let it be a book.
Well, here, amen. Let it be a book. And there is a book, and we have the book, and we actually, this is a separate question, and we will be posting about it. It's practically impossible to get this book in Russian right now. And we're working on it. My colleagues are working on trying to get the books in Russian, the copies. Fortunately,
Actually, it was just published in Russian a couple of weeks ago, so
great.
We have a newborn, yeah,
Excellent.
Beautiful hardcover thing. Oh goodness! Wow, how beautiful with these Thanks for the post. It's
There's-
amazing.
It's filled with imagery, filled with it.
Wow, beautiful.
I
Thank you
didn't
so
see-
much for showing it.
I didn't see this other image. We also offer it in English. This is easily or probably hands down the best translation of any Russian work of literature I've seen. I have enjoyed the language so much and the wonders of translation. It's incredible. It's just really a good match for the book. So please contact us if you want to read the book, if you want to have it. And thank you so much, Maria, for joining us. I know it's late for you for this talk. It was so moving, and reading and talking to you and being able to hear you talking more about what we are all so lucky to read, and for writing this book, because I understand what tremendous work it must have been, and really looking forward to more from you. Please write more, please speak more. It's very important to all of us. Thank you so much, the audience, everybody who joined on Zoom with these incredible questions, incredible input. Everything we agree and disagree makes for the conversation, and conversation, the truth is born, whatever this fleeting thing that we're looking for. And thank you so much for everybody who's watching us on YouTube. And I'm sorry not everybody can join us live because I understand there's time difference. Thank you for joining us. Please subscribe to Globus Books channel, because we are running it for free for everyone. It helps us to get more subscribers, and we are bringing some more great writers in June and further on. Thank you again. Stay safe, stay sane, and write to us if you have ideas for the programs. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you. It was
yeah,
wonderful.
thank you so much, Maria.